So we're going to transition into our next panel here. So thank you all for staying with us. We're going to start talking about OT networks and really the BAS Odyssey we're on. So to kick this off, just want to say that currently in the market today, did you know that last year, and this is Scott Cochrane's stats based on talking to all the manufacturers and trying to get an idea of what's going on. But last year, my estimate is about 25% of projects were spec'd with IP controls. So that would have been in 2023. Now, currently what I'm hearing and what the trend looks like is we're probably up to about 35 to 40% of projects are being specified IP. Now, where are they being specified? Primarily where there are contractors that are already able to support the technology, frankly. And the contractors are the ones that are going in that are making the MEPs confident that it's, it's okay to spec this stuff, we got a plan, things like that. Of course, with that being said, the MEP, the engineering environment, they're still very skeptical of moving off of the old way of doing things. Serial worked. Serial had it did not, in their perception, have any cybersecurity issues, and because of that, most engineers today they don't want to cross that bridge over to this OT network. It's a big ask, and so we as an industry, it's our job to bring confidence to those engineers. It's our job, the manufacturer's job, to continue to innovate these products and bring us to the latest technologies. And as the integrator community, it's your job to pick this stuff up and roll with it. So, for today's conversation, I have an awesome panel. I have all industry leaders here, all with oodles of experience in this. All have seen the transition we're going through, the DDC to this new OT network transition we're on. And so I'm super excited to have them. So Greg is actually on my panel. He's not a host. And what we're going to do here is I'm first going to ask each one of my panelists to just introduce themselves, a little bit of their background, what they do today, and then we'll dive into essentially a panel conversation with them to talk about this topic. So we'll start with Mr. King Thomas.
Thank you, Scott. King Thomas, as Scott mentioned, with Honeywell. I lead our distribution and OEM business for the Honeywell brand for North America. This is the only business I've been in for 38 years now. So super excited about the panel, looking forward to the questions.
Greg Fitzpatrick, worked with Cochrane Supply and Engineering as the business development leader for IoT and integration. Been in the industry for about 30 years. I've done everything from run my own consulting engineering firm to working as an owner's rep to owning a commissioning firm, and now full circle back with someone who I used to be his customer years ago. And I'm excited to be here. This is something I'm really passionate about, this topic.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Lewis. I lead the indirect channel sales for Johnson Controls Americas, North America and Latin America. I've been in the BAS industry for about 22 years and with Johnson Controls for about 17 years. Thank you, Scott and team, for allowing us to be here. It's great to be here.
My name is Mark Peacock. I'm currently the Chief Marketing Communications Strategy Officer for LinkSpring. I've been there 12 years. Prior to that, one of the old guards at Tritium. And if you ever heard of Niagara AX, right here, I launched that. Didn't create it, but I launched it and made Niagara the brand, hopefully, that it is and remains today. I'm also a founder and big organizer for Project Haystack. Many of you have heard that as well. And I'm delighted to be here as well. And just one quick side note, you heard Scott on one of his talks say he gives people a hard time. Yes, he does, but it's good. It's a loving hard time. I remember the day after I walked into Tritium, and I said, well, tell me a little bit about the customers and things like that. 3 people immediately said, Scott Cochrane, watch out for him. He's going to kill you. But I'll be honest with you, he hasn't, and I consider him a professional colleague and a good friend. So, his bark is worse than his bite. So just to let you know.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And when I'm on stage, I'm a very nice feller, though. As you can all tell, you never know that I'm like a Jekyll and Hyde. But going into our topic here, and really it's funny, Mark brings it up, is, a lot of what we're here to talk about is this OT network. And a lot of what I've been yelling at these manufacturers about for a long time is simply converge the technology that's available with your friggin' products. As I mentioned in the keynote this morning, Mike Mitchell and the IT team at Cochrane Supply have done a fantastic job of keeping us up to date with what's out there. And so we know what's available in the tech community today. And then, no offense, but the BAS manufacturers, sometimes you're not quite there yet. And we're maybe 5 years behind, 10 years design. And then I get frustrated. And then I yell. Like, I yelled at Rick, I yelled at Ed, I yell at George. See, George, look at him. Poor guy. No, I'm kidding. No, anyways. But it is about this OT network. So let's start with this first basic question, which is a little basic. But I'd like, Greg, if you could start with this one, because actually what I hired Greg to do, believe it or not, is to go into the MEP community and help them understand what this concept is. So Greg, could you kind of speak to just, and on a high level, what is an OT network?
It's basically an IP network that can support all the operational technology in a building that's IP based, right? So whether you're using a hybrid system, a combination of all IP devices and some MSTP devices, the MSTP devices will go to a gateway like a JACE of some sort, and you would support those devices with an infrastructure that's IP based, right? Your switches, your network management switches, your fiber, Cat6, the whole 9 yards. And the struggle has been getting MEPs to understand that it's not as a heavy lift as you think to get it in a set of plans and specifications, because most engineering firms don't want to recreate the wheel and introduce new technology unless they feel like someone like myself and other people in our industry can streamline that process and help them get it in a set of plans and specifications that reduce their risk, and so that they understand the submittal drawings when they come in.
Yeah, could you hand it over to Mark for a minute? Mark, LinkSpring, you've done a fantastic job of helping the community see the value of IP in terms of the controllers you've built and you've marketed for these years. Tell us about the OT network. How do you guys, because you have to have an OT network for your product. So how does LinkSpring describe an OT network to their customers?
Well, I think you got to look at why an OT network. And it's clearly, it's not that difficult. It is convergence. Now, we've all heard convergence of IT and OT, but I'm going to add a third one in there called WP, which is the workplace technologies. All those three areas have converged, and really the only way for them to work together is via an OT network. So that's number one. Number two is look at the drivers today. Beside those is that look at the our end user customers, those who pay us, everybody in this room, to make their buildings smart, intelligent, or whatever, is one, they have to reduce risk. They're all today all about reducing risk and risk mitigation. Number two is you cannot have a conversation without the business side today. And when you're talking about the business side versus the technology side, OT naturally comes up. And the third is how many IT folks now are involved in our decisions that and are part of the conversations that we all have to engage each and every day. So I look at it as from the why. I leave it up to the smarter people than me to figure out how to actually do it. People like Greg, tell me how to do it. All right, this is how you do it. We're done. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah. And Jonathan, moving over to you at Johnson Controls, an OT network is really important to Johnson, not just for BAS, but for all the products that Johnson sells. Could you speak to, again, what is an OT network? It's bigger than just BAS, right? Could you speak to that a little?
Yeah. So I'll go and give you the three examples that are probably easier to bring to the table. there are 5.9 million commercial buildings in the United States. That's about 1 billion square foot of building to work with. That's the macro environment we live in. Buildings are becoming bigger and more complex. And, as we all have experience in this industry, there is a shortage of talent. Boiler Bob is retiring. The knowledge base on how to operate these buildings is diminishing by the day. And the only way we can continue to support this increasing footprint, that we're building is by simplifying the complexity. So to answer your question, Scott, if you look at the integration at Johnson Controls between Metasys, Simplex, and Secure, that was introduced probably 7 years ago with the introduction of Tyco into Johnson Controls portfolio, you'll see the birth of, operating technologies. If you look at a building, in 1995, we went from having coax cable to going to Ethernet. In the early 2000s, the phones switched from being wire into being, IP driven. Then after that, security system follows, little by little, and I do agree with you, BAS is a little behind, not because we want to, but because of many of the mechanical requirements out there in the market, steel demand, steel and fans that utilize very old technology, because of factors like price. So at Johnson Controls, we are looking to digitize, our solutions while still supporting a very large install base, that we created over 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's very true, and and that OT network is going to be in the middle of the whole thing for Johnson for a long time. And King, you've been around, you've seen the transition, pneumatic to DDC to now to OT, right? This new OT network, I mean, what is it in terms of, like, you've seen it from multiple manufacturers now, but from your standpoint, this new transition, what makes this so different than the other ones in terms of what is an OT network?
Before I answer the OT piece, I'd like to go back a little bit.
Sure.
We started yesterday, and you talk about, we've had a big discussion about the convergence of IT and OT and where we're going, and we went back to pneumatics. So if you start back at pneumatics, the discussion for pneumatics to BAS wasn't about data, right? There wasn't really any talk about data. That was about CapEx and OpEx. The install a pneumatics job, the installation cost of a pneumatics job was cheaper on the front end, but the life cycle cost was immense. You think about what you did in the pneumatics world. You put an air compressor in the basement, you ran a main, a branch, and for the upkeep of that was balancing receiver controllers. So the convergence of that, or the flip side of that, if you went to the DDC world, that installation cost, the initial cost was expensive. You had to buy all these digital controllers, but the life cycle of that completely different. I don't need a receiver control. I don't have to calibrate that. I'm just tuning PID loops through software. So the discussion changed from the economics of CapEx and OpEx to now going 20 years later to now looking at the data part of it. The data is the value. The cost is still the cost. We have to get to the right number, but what do we do with the data? So that brings us to the IT world, where if you think it, and I like to think about IT in the form of more data and OT being operational technology, being more hardware. And the bandwidth is the big struggle. Software always drives hardware. It's software first. That's where the innovation comes from. That's where the technology comes from. And then we build hardware to suit it. And I remember years ago, and I was a computer nerd, and I was building computers in my basement, and there was no Best Buy. You didn't go buy a computer. You went to a flea market, and you got a hard drive, and you got memory. And when I saw we had 8 megs of RAM, and when I saw a terabyte, I'm like, how could you ever use that? But that was the innovation of the software driving the hardware, and we had to keep up. And I'm going to digress just a little bit because, I see Ed there, and I don't see Ed very often when we come to these events. And when Ed and I saw each other, we started reminiscing when we did, and Mark talked about this in the early Tritium days, Ed, myself, and Scott Bain probably sold more Jaces in the state of Virginia than anyone. And I'm talking 20 years ago because that was R2.
That's when I had hair.
Oh, well, you had hair. At least you still have some, right? So just for the record. But again, back to the topic. It's really about the data now and what do we do with it. And Scott, you made a point about when you kicked us off about the manufacturers not keeping up with the technology. And you think about the T1L and T1S. Those are proven technologies. They've been out there forever, 15 years, and you heard Sarah mention that a couple of days ago. But if you think about in the automotive world, because it's bandwidth, automotive world is using T1S, that's short, T1L is long. So the distances, if I'm in my car, I don't need to go 100 meters. But if you think about all the cars we drive today, in your door, there's a computer there running your windows, your memory buttons for the seats, the door locks, and the overhead console. There's a computer there running your sunroof and your OnStar and whatever's opening your garage doors. That's been running on T1S forever, for 15 years. But automotive needed more bandwidth. So those networks are daisy chained right back to your dash like we're doing in building automation. So what we're talking about is prevalent in our world. We don't see it. A lot of people don't see it in the buildings that we do today, but that's our job. So we're really excited about what we're doing in the IT and OT space. And I could go on.
Yeah, thanks,
I'm sure you got more questions.
Just so you guys know, we have more questions.
Well, you wound this group up. You
I know.
So to your point about data, and if we go back years, I don't know, let's just even as briefly as 5 years ago, did we have conversations about data? A little bit here or there, but today it's front and center. And I'll just share this with you. I've come to the realization that the data is now more valuable than all the devices and the controllers we manufacture, we install, and we all support. So they're just enablers for the data and then something to happen with that data.
Agreed. And I just want to, point out that an OT network on Ethernet versus a serial network has 1 million times the bandwidth. So, you talk about the why IP. I think to Mark's point, we're going to get to that. That's definitely a driver. So while you guys are quiet for a millisecond, I'm going to change the slide. So I got a great panel. I love this panel. So all right. So I guess let's let King kick this one off. So King, when we talk about an OT network, the design of one, there's a lot of questions that people have. So let's talk about a couple of different ways to look at this. So I guess, King, in an OT network, like an OT network, when we talk, it's an Ethernet network. Now we're going into somebody's building, owner-occupied in a lot of cases, right, or potentially, and so in that case, there's an IT infrastructure already there. So what does an OT network look like in the built space in terms of like with an IT department that's already in a building? Could you speak to how to talk about that design with an end user or what the options are?
Yeah, it's critical, and if we think about what we do every day and the conversations that we're having and who we're having those conversations with, and it's been said over the last few days, it's impossible to go in here without talking to a system administrator and having the right conversations. And a lot of times we're not very comfortable having that conversation because it's not just opening up ports. We heard that a couple of days ago too. I want to go and open up a port in the IT. They can put a stop work on the job, literally. Because I'm sure you'll have questions around security, but it's going to be the conversation between our devices, physical devices, hanging on a network that's existing backbone in the infrastructure, which is, Cat 5 or Cat 6 that's been run when the building was installed. It's a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversations. Greg said it yesterday in his breakout around that value proposition and who you're talking to at the C-suite. You have to go in understanding the questions to ask of a system administrator and build that trust. But without that, you will not be hanging on their network. And in today's environment, that security is going to be question one.
Yeah, for sure. And pass it, if you don't mind passing it to Greg. So this is Greg's drawing, by the way, if anybody'd like more information. Greg has a website stood up. It's smartbuildingdesign.com. And these are some sample OT network drawings. Greg, could you just talk about some of the key components of an OT network? What are some of those key components that typically are not in a BAS project that have to go into an OT network?
Yeah, the drawing that you're looking at here is something that I introduced to the industry probably 2 or 3 years ago to the consulting engineering community, called a systems integration drawing, right? The drawings used to be called system architecture drawings, and it would just include a simple riser diagram that a systems integrator couldn't look at and tell you where is the web supervisor being deployed, for instance, right? So you have to start with having a conversation with the right people within an organization to know, are you going to let me deploy all of these IP devices on your IT network, right, their built environment, or would you like me to limit that and design a system where we design our own IP infrastructure, which turns into an OT network because it supports more technology than just BAS, and we connect to your system in one place, right? Theoretically, just like a Jace on a small building, right?
Can I point out one thing, Greg? This is important to understand. When you're talking to the end user, if they already have a network in place and a team to manage it, and they say, I'm going to give you a VLAN, that's an OT network, folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
That becomes an OT network. Now, just because you're not putting in that network infrastructure does not mean that's not an OT network, okay? I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, because there's a lot of confusion in the market space thinking that I have to put in all these networks. Not necessarily, right, Greg?
No, absolutely not. And this example that you see here is from an actual project where the owner said they didn't want anything on their IT infrastructure and asked the engineer to design a project for 4 buildings where they stood up their own OT network. Self-contained, doesn't touch their IT infrastructure, right? But it has to have remote access. So when you get into that, now you're not just talking about switches, the network mediums such as Cat6, fiber, and so forth. So now you're talking about the network management, you're talking about routers, you're talking about the VPN appliance, you're talking about the security of firewall, physical firewall, and now some type of cell modem to get out of the building and set up your remote access. So that's a total, what you're looking at now is a totally self-contained IP network or OT network that's the responsibility of the master systems integrator, right? The responsibility of the master systems integrator. When you look at this drawing, the yellow lines represent the fiber, the blue lines represent Cat6, the purple represent 485. So that's a hybrid system. But any systems integrator sitting in this room right now can look at this drawing and pretty much tell exactly what the scope of the project is. You can see that it's self-contained. You see that there's remote access. You see that there's multiple on-prem servers there with a backup instance of Niagara being deployed in the cloud. So all that information is on that one drawing called a systems integration drawing. And not only that, the hardware that's for the network management switches, the firewall, and so forth are shown in the top left-hand corner of that drawing and let you know how big that OT network MDF cabinet has to be, and everything is going to be in that cabinet. So now you know what type of space is allotted, or is going to need to be allotted for that cabinet, so you can identify an area where that cabinet is going to be installed. Is it too heavy to hang on the wall? Is it going to be on wheels? Is it going to be in the facilities room? Is it going to be part of IT in their room? But it has to be secured somewhere. So pushing out these drawings are a way that we're trying to get the industry up to speed and let the engineers know that, hey, it's not rocket science. There's a way to implement this into your drawings.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, we say, what does an OT network look like? But the reality is there is not a standard for an OT network in our industry today.
Absolutely not.
Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because it's hard to get started in it because you don't know who to kind of copy or how to do it. It's a good thing because you all can create a competitive advantage over your other competitors by having a competence in being able to put an IT infrastructure together cost effectively. And knowledge is power in terms of that. And Jonathan, you're shaking your head. Would you like to add to that?
I would like to add. So from a manufacturer perspective, we spend a lot of time involving how we can have an OT network for contractors that doesn't inflate the installation costs and the execution costs of one that is used to for doing with twisted pair wires or RS-485. So what you'll see from a manufacturer's perspective in the case of Johnson Controls is we introduce technologies like unmanaged switches, supporting Cisco IE2000s or 3000s. What that does to you is have an easier conversation with a well-known brand in the market that doesn't require the support of an IT department the way a managed switch. We're also talking about switches that are shock-proof and dust-proof that are fundamentally important for any construction event. As the ITs are usually the last guy seen because of the power requirement, as a BAS guy, you have to be in very early in the game for commissioning purpose and things like that. So from a manufacturing perspective, we try to take these OT designs and trying to implement solutions, that simplify, that complexity and reduces the cost. And unmanaged switch, MRP is another example of, keeping, the communication going with, field controllers, on a Cat5 network that may lose power, so forth and so on, right? Just things to add in there.
Yeah, and staying with you, Jonathan, of course, you guys build products, IP-based products.
Absolutely.
That really are network products in their own right, correct? So an OT network today, like the design, what does it look like? It's those hubs and switches and things, but then also our controllers become a part of that network, correct?
So we were one of the first ones to introduce technology in the early 2000s to use web services as a way to communicate between supervisories and the server controller with the Metasys brand, for example, outside of Tritium. So if you look at, the web service communication between SNE or an NAE and a server device, it just used, IP-based communication, and this was introduced in the early 2000s, right? That would be an example of it. In the operating technology space, the goal is to simplify complexity. And when we talk about complexity, it's not only the complexity of the system over its life cycle, but its initiation. To King's point earlier, there is a CapEx and an OpEx that we all have to deal with, with making these decisions. So as a manufacturer, our responsibility is to ensure that these product solutions have the lowest impact in commissioning time, the lowest impact in installation time, and so everything has to be covered for an end user, not just, the data that results from having the system.
Cool. Mark, I'm going to give you the next one to start with.
All righty, because again, I couldn't add to what my colleagues
Well,
did.
they
Anyway.
covered a lot there, so
Anyway.
I figured I'd start you with a clean slate, buddy.
All right.
So tell us, and again, Link Spring, you guys are a leader in this. You guys started down the road before many, was like Easy.io and Link Spring, right? Early, you guys were like innovators right along the lines of Tritium in terms of going IP. And why did they go down that road? Why did that happen, Mark?
That's a good question. In that, I could say we woke up one day and said, we have to go IP. No, it wasn't. It was after lots of debate, lots of research, lots of conversations with various people, building owners, contractors, integrators, but we knew we wanted to do it. But there were when we decided this, there were two primary things. We said, all right, we're going to do it, and it must be IP, because we believed, this was back in 2015, we started seeing this. And we said, all right, we need a strategy, and we have to be IP for lots of different reasons. But one of the main ones was, if we do this, we have to take advantage of the most ubiquitous platform in the marketplace, Niagara. So that made our decision, all right, that's easy. We can do that with Niagara after negotiation as far as getting portability and all that. And then two is that cybersecurity back then started rearing its ugly head. And I'm saying that respectfully. And we said, all right, that, and then data. It was that cybersecurity, data, and the most ubiquitous platform. And we rolled the dice, and we've been extremely successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And kicking it over to King. King, again, you got a broad perspective on this topic, of course. Could you share with us why the different manufacturers you've worked with have transitioned to IP?
I think we had to. I think we had to do it. And Mark alluded to it. The building backbone is an IP network. That's in place. If you think about the data, it was bandwidth. There's only so much bandwidth that you can normally get. That brought in fiber. That brought in, kind of started moving us away from MSTP and twisted pair. But from a portfolio standpoint, you look at your collection of controllers and the collection of devices you have, and what's the optimal path that you need to go down for the future, right? So if you have any long-range planning, in the future for Honeywell is what we make it. So if you think about how do we get there, and what's the fastest path, and also thinking about that long-range planning, the data requirement is not going to get smaller. So it's really bandwidth, and Mark alluded to that when they chose to go down that path. You have to think about what's going to be required. And we came in we followed up on a panel from Energy, and you think about what they were being tasked with, and what we as an industry are being tasked with. It's huge, and you just can't get it there with the old technology. So we have to do this. We have to go down this path, and it's exciting, honestly.
For sure. Jonathan, please.
I'd like to add.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. I know from a JCI perspective back in the day, we know that between 70 and 80% of most of your projects are related to labor, some type of labor, commissioning labor, technician labor, installation labor, verification, test and balance, I know that this is an audience that will understand that a 9800 baud rate, is a lot less than 3800, and 10 meg is a lot more than 38,000, So the why for Johnson Controls was very simple. We need to build the most efficient way to reduce labor costs, in the market, in order for the fast adoptions of new technologies to improve the way buildings, are brought online, if you will, right? We've been bringing buildings online since we walked away from pneumatics, but the speed in which we're able to do it matters. So IP technology allowed us to 10x what we did in the past with MSTP, and 100x or 1000x what in Johnson history we did in the past with the N2 protocol, right? All very robust, very popular, but with the limitation of a speed, and a speed drives more labor, and more labor makes it more inefficient for us to go out and get these buildings online. So,
Jonathan, keep the mic for a minute.
Yeah.
On this same topic, how long will it be before Johnson Controls starts to end of life serial devices, do you think? And I mean, when I say end of life, I don't mean like you stop selling them. I just mean you stop working on developing them.
That's a great question, Scott. So I can tell you that Johnson Controls is fully committed to the install base. I was born in '79. That means in 1992, I was playing Nintendo somewhere at home, okay? And in 1992, when we introduced the first generation of Metasys controllers, in this particular case, the VMA 1420, that was the very first transition into a DDC controller, that was robust enough to last, an entire 15-year or 20-year cycle.
And to one of the best protocols ever.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Same thing with the DX9100. So I go all the way to 1992 to answer your question, because the commitment to ensure that the install base is protected and the capital investment made on those controllers is protected by Johnson Controls still stand. And today, we're a little slower than most of our peers, because we are committed to ensure that the 1992 technology still can be supported while introducing IP technology. So you can take an IP controller and even the latest MSTP controllers on the CVM Gen 4 product line, Facility Explorer or Metasys, and this thing will be 100% backwards compatible to a 1992 controller. So the idea that we're going to walk away from serial controllers is not realistic simply because of the many decades, and the large install base and abandoning that install base.
Right.
That said, the adoption of these new technologies and the fastest or the improvement on speed in which we can implement these systems is going to outweigh, in some cases, the install base, and is going to drive customers, to make that hard decision. But I don't think that they will be going away anytime soon.
Yeah,
simply
agreed.
because of the amount of install base we have out there.
Well, and a good example of that is you can still come to any one of our branches and buy a T-4000 direct-acting pneumatic Johnson Controls thermostat, right? So the installed base will be around for a while.
So if we do the homework, it took 3 to 4 decades for the last buggy to be out after the Model T came out, right? So Model T is out, and we all love it. That doesn't mean those buggy horses are going to be away, go away right away.
Let's just not tell the MEPs we're trying to convince.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
No,
let's not tell. We're telling you all this so you can feel good about it, but let's not
exactly
tell them
right.
that. So. Hey, Greg, could you take the mic on this one? So with this network, how does it change the perspective of what's needed for these systems now? Like if you look at typical systems today, I don't want to say they're basic versus an OT network, but there's a lot more complexity, a lot more risk. Could you speak to some of the major changes with this?
Well, the most glaring change is going to be cyber awareness. And we're going to talk about that in the next program. But being cyber aware and knowing what your responsibility will be, whether you're standing up your own self-contained OT network or you're operating in the owner's built environment, you have to be aware of cybersecurity requirements. The organization that I'm with right now called the Real Estate Cyber Consortium, it's made up of CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, so forth. And one of the major initiatives that's being put together right now is an owner's project requirements document that addresses cyber for OT. So in other words, this is a document that building owners will be passing along to consulting engineers to be embedded in the specification that addresses cyber, right? So their policies, their best practices, so forth is going to be passed on to you now, right? So it's going to end up in the specifications. It's going to end up in the plan and spec world. And you guys are going to have to be familiar with the terminology, know how to talk to IT departments, know exactly how to stand up your own firewall, set the rules up and so forth. And I would say that's the most glaring difference right now. And being familiar with the hardware, like the drawing that you just saw, the systems integration drawing, there were network management switches, right? The front end with the graphical user interface that shows you every switch, every managed switch in that topology. And you have to be familiar with all of those things, how to set up your own VPN appliances, firewalls, routers, VLANs, right? You're going to have to be familiar with all this topology because it all applies now that we're getting into the realm of IP controllers and standing up your own OT network.
Yeah, and I'm going to pass it over to Mark. Mark, on this topic again, LinkSpring, you guys have changed a lot of people's perspective on this. Could you speak to this topic?
Yeah, and we will. I just want to add one thing. What Greg said is that as you are getting RFIs, as you are talking to various folks, segments within the industry, whether it be data centers, whether it be federal government, whether it be pharmaceutical, life science, all those, their RFIs are now coming with sections. And I don't mean 1 or 2 pages, 25, 40, 50 pages of questions to answer about cybersecurity. Banks, financial. So this is all part of it. And those that we've looked at and reviewed and we're working with various clients in is that first and foremost, what is your position on IP? First and foremost, going forward. But then, again, I think what I said earlier is that owners now expect this. In other words, the technology is moved. Our industry continues to move. And if you look at the hardware, and I see you've got AI there, and that's a good example. I mean, whether we like it or not, we are going AI. Are we there yet? No. Have we fully defined it? Hell no. No, we're still in that incubation stage. But like, for example, is our next generation edge IP controllers, which we're working on now, the new boards and chipset, will have a completely dedicated chip to just AI applications. Just AI, in addition to the normal BAS IP, whatever the case is. So I think, again, whether we all like it or not, we are going down the IP path, and it is going to be the future. And one last thing, and I'll kind of go out on the limb on this, is that are we that far in our industry where we are offering BAS, building automation, stuff we all do, as a complete service? In other words, the controllers, your devices, your service, your data is all as a service, not being paid individually for your controllers, your devices. Are we that far off? IP is going to drive that.
For sure, for sure. Jonathan, anything to add on this topic?
I think we enjoy the luxury of an industry that is attached to the mechanical world, unlike fire or security that are standalone low voltage technologies. We are still in the electromechanical world. And to the comments to my peers, I think the revolution in the industry is going to happen when manufacturers of equipment start implementing either factory mounted control strategy or increasing the intelligence that come on board of the equipment that they're shipping. So what we foresee is a future where equipment manufacturers will have plug and play devices that allowed a piece of equipment to become a system without the need of anything to be added to it. And that's the future that we hope to see, very soon. Today, we make the systems by taking a piece of equipment and adding controls to it. In the future, we expect that system to come from the factory and you just put an IP wire to it. Then we'll be responsible for aggregating the data. So.
That's a very interesting perspective on it, for sure. Thank you.
It's all about the manufacturer's ability to integrate their equipment and make it into a system, which is today's the BAS responsibility, right? We have become an accessory, and we have become a percentage of a larger picture, in terms of mechanical equipment, because we provide the efficiency. None of the equipments that we work on today are efficient without our technology. So the future, is a future where that product, is embedded into that mechanical system, making it seamless to the end user.
Oh, that's a great point. King, anything else to add as a spin on the perspective changes we're seeing with these new systems?
When I think about it, the first thing that comes to mind for me when we go back and we think about the algorithms that we used to write, and Mark mentioned about AI, and we've been doing start-stop optimization and chiller plant optimization for a very long time. But the question is, what's changing the perspective? The perspective for me isn't just in the building any longer. It's in district cooling. It's in plants that are providing those algorithms, using that big data, providing chilled water or hot water or superheated steam out to facilities, hospitals, and others. That's the perspective for me that's changing. It's not just in the built environment, it's in what's going to be built, and also in the larger systems that will be functioning, that a facility manager in his building won't have the chiller there because that chiller's in the district cooling plant. They'll have to manage the air handler, the valves, the other infrastructure. That's a big perspective change as we drive forward.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of dovetailing on everything, the one big perspective change that I've seen is that interoperability is truly real now on OT networks. They're designed to be interoperable. So devices that go on those networks have to meet certain criteria before they even get on the network, which makes them interoperable by nature. And of course, with things like APIs and other methods of sharing data with any system on the Ethernet layer, you can't do that on the serial layer. So to me, the biggest perspective change is really that interoperability is just off the charts now, folks. And of course, being on an IP infrastructure allows us to jump and use devices that may be not traditional to our space, but can bring a lot of value too. And as a reseller of these things, we're like, oh boy, low-rot WAN and all this other cool stuff we're gonna be able to bring you guys now. Why? Because we're on Ethernet now. So now we can start to look at technologies there, and we know they'll work with the other technologies we're currently selling.
To your point, Scott, it feels like open is becoming open. Open was never really open.
Yeah.
We talked about it a lot. We talk about plug and play. Plug and play has never been plug and play. If you think you're just going to plug that in and it plays. So to your point, Scott, I think open is finally feels like it's really becoming open.
Yeah, agreed.
And just to echo, Scott, you hit on, to me, is one of the most important words today is interoperability. It's not about integration anymore. We do that, we do it in our sleep each and every day. It's about interoperability. It's interoperability, not only the systems, but the various equipment, whether it's a JCI, Honeywell, LinkSpring, it doesn't matter. And more importantly, it's interoperability of the data, where all that data is coming from these still disparate systems. All that data has to be interoperable as well. So that to me is the word of the next 8 to 10 years, well, 2 words, IP and interoperability.
And guys, we're at the end, so if you just share your closing thoughts. Mark, go ahead.
I just did. There, you got them. There you go. You got them.
Thanks, Mark. Jonathan.
No, thank you for the opportunity. We do believe that OTs and IP technologies are going to be the future, and we cannot wait to participate and be part of the journey.
Be sure to go and visit our website, smartbuildingdesign.com. I promise you there's a ton of really, really good information that kind of walks you through the entire process. We've got guide specifications on there for this stuff, Division 25, Division 23, any and all products that you can think of when you think about deploying these OT networks. There's also systems integration drawings on there that I can provide to you in a Visio format, but they're PDF, but they're different ways to deploy an OT network. I've got a list of questions for you to go to an IT department to ask them when you start your journey or start a project. So if you have any questions regarding deploying this technology, please give me a call. I can walk you through it in my sleep.
Thanks, Craig.
For me, it's one. Thank you guys for letting us participate as a panelist here. But it's really the future's now. Stop by our booth, see the future. It's there. A lot of what we're talking about is here. It's ready for you to purchase. We're super excited. I can't think of a better time to be in our industry than now. It's really, really progressive, and we had a lot of work to do. But man, it's fun.
Well, guys, thank you. You were awesome. Great panel. Thank you very much. Okay, don't go anywhere. We got one more session, and this one follows intentionally because we just taught you all about OT networks, but there's cybersecurity is an important topic that goes with it. So if the new panelists would come up, guys, thank you. Thank you.